All right, folks, welcome to According to Sam. This is episode 245. Thank you for watching. We're still talking about the Bush-Clinton dynasty in this podcast. And I said that we were going to get into talking about the 2008 financial crash in this podcast, but we are not. Hopefully we can pick that up on Friday. We'll see what happens in the debate tomorrow. The debate is in Pennsylvania tomorrow. Should be interesting. I thought that, a great strategy for Donald Trump in the first debate that he did with Joe Biden was to say as little as possible and let Joe Biden speak and as much as possible. And in doing so, that Joe Biden would bury himself. And I think that the same strategy for Donald Trump is in play tomorrow. Say as little as possible, let Kamala Harris speak as much as possible, and she will bury herself. That's why she hasn't been doing interviews. That's why she has been protected on the campaign trail, saying as little as possible, because they don't want any truth to fall out of her mouth. They're trying to shape this woman as the change candidate. And that's what we've been talking about all these guys that have endorsed her. And on Friday, I did my show. On Wednesday, Liz Cheney had come out with her endorsement of Kamala Harris, saying that she was going to vote for Kamala Harris. And then on Friday, Liz Cheney was in Texas at the Texas Tribune, and she announced that her father was also Dick Cheney endorsing Kamala Harris. So we're right up there to Bush's vice president. Not only is Dick Cheney Bush's vice president, he's good friends with Bush's father, the patriarch of the Bush-Clinton dynasty. And so now you have 200 Republicans from the two Bush administrations, from the Romney and McCain campaigns, plus you have Obama and his wife and all of the Obama surrogates supporting Kamala Harris. And then you also have Bill Clinton, all his surrogates. So she has the entire empire lined up behind her. And she says that she is the change candidate. Asking the question, who is the change candidate? If you want to look at just the empire, the Bush-Clinton dynasty alone, this is 36 years compared to 4 years. And they want you to believe that all of your problems, everything that is wrong with this country and that is bad in this country is because of this guy's 4 years. If you want to be partisan about it, which I think is ridiculous because these people don't care anything about political parties. But if you want to be partisan about it, Donald Trump and Republicans represent 4 years and Democrats represent of the last 16 years, Democrats represent 12 of the last 16 years. And this guy represents 4, if you want to be partisan about it. But to be honest about it, this guy represents 4 of the last 36 years of the Bush-Clinton dynasty. And they want you to think that this guy's responsible for all of your problems, and to change, to turn the page is what Kamala Harris is talking about now. She is the current vice president. Her and Joe Biden have been in office for 3.5 years now, and she is running on turning the page. She's on this page. She wants us to turn the page to her, where she's going to be on the next page too. This is ridiculous. This cartoon, I saw this cartoon. I thought it was really funny. I'm going to share it with you guys. You can see they're at a swimming pool. All these people are drowning. It says inflation, crime, they're drowning. And this is Kamala Harris. When I become lifeguard, you are the lifeguard, lady. You are the lifeguard. You and Joe Biden have been there for 3.5 years. How can you represent a turning of the page? How can you represent change? But again, that's what Barack Obama sold us in 2008. We'd be fools to buy this again. All of these guys from the Bush-Clinton dynasty, all these guys from the last 36 years, who honestly, as you're going to see when we do get into what happened with the financial crisis and how all three of these presidents played a role in the financial crisis and how it was all planned and they all got rich off of it. When we explain that, you're going to see how all of these guys are responsible for your problems. And all of these guys are endorsing. This one hasn't endorsed yet, but I'm going to show you in a moment what he's saying now. But they're pretty much all endorsing Kamala Harris. Take a listen to this clip.
And the same New York Times poll shows this race nationally is...
This new New York Times poll, New York Times Siena poll just came out, and the honeymoon, the Kamala Harris honeymoon is over. Now we're getting back to reality, and it's not looking good for Kamala Harris. Yeah, tomorrow night's going to be a big night for her because it's not trending in her direction. But this is a question about, in this poll, about who do you think represents change? Who's the change candidate?
This race nationally is a toss-up right now. 1 point separates Harris and Trump, again, within the margin of error. But look at who people see as the change candidate. 53% say Trump represents major change, just 25% for Harris. Maybe seems counterintuitive since Trump was already president. He hasn't stopped talking about...
It's hilarious. So she says it's counterintuitive for more people to see Trump as the change candidate because he's already been president. Lady, she's the president right now, or the vice president right now. She's a member of the current administration. How can it be counterintuitive to see Trump as the change candidate when he's not in power, when he hasn't been in power for 3.5 years, and she is the current candidate? I'm blown away that 25% of the country in this poll sees her as a change candidate, and only 53% see Trump. This should be much higher, much higher. This is, and it's so important because this is a change election. 65-70% of the country believes that the country is headed in the wrong direction. And the drivers that are driving the country in that direction are Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. How can it be counterintuitive to say that Trump represents change in this election? But that's the campaign that she's running. She's running on that she's the change candidate. I think that it's absolutely ridiculous. And it's even more ridiculous when you are getting the endorsements of the likes of Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney. So again, I talked in the last podcast about Liz Cheney's endorsement, and later that evening, after I'd already put the podcast out, I saw that Liz Cheney had said that her father was also endorsing Kamala Harris, and then Dick Cheney also put out a statement. This should tell you everything. This should tell you everything about who the change candidate is, who Kamala Harris is, that she is getting the endorsement of Dick Cheney. Liz Cheney was on the ABC morning show yesterday with Hot Carl. I want you to take a listen to a little bit of this report, and then we're going to listen to some of the interview that he did with her a little bit later. But I just want you to hear this report that he does here.
This week featured another extraordinary moment in American politics. Liz Cheney and her father, former Vice President Dick Cheney, long considered among the most conservative and partisan Republicans in the land, announced they are endorsing Kamala Harris for president. The former vice president was once vilified by Democrats, labeled as a real-life Darth Vader.
A real-life Darth Vader. Listen, people. That's what they used to call this guy, Darth Vader. Now, this goes back to my analogy that I've been saying for the past few weeks, that that if you're looking at this in the using the themes of Star Wars and using Star Wars as an analogy, that Kamala Harris being endorsed by the Bush-Clinton dynasty and all of these guys and the entire empire on her side, that she would represent the empire, not the rebel rebellion. No matter what you think about change and who the change candidate is, she represents the empire. She is being endorsed now by Darth Vader. Back to my analogy. She's being endorsed by Darth Vader. Not only all of the other heads and members of the dark side and of the empire, now she's being endorsed by Darth Vader himself. This is what the left called him and dubbed him Darth Vader. Interesting.
Labeled as a real-life Darth Vader, but his statement endorsing Harris offered an especially harsh view of Donald Trump. In our nation's 248-year history, Dick Cheney wrote, there has never been an individual who is a greater threat to our republic than Donald Trump.
You are we're a greater threat to our republic, bro. What are you talking about? That, I mean, if that's not the pot calling the kettle black in 248 years that no one has ever been a bigger threat. This guy was a bigger threat to our democracy and to our republic. And he's saying that it's Donald Trump? I think that's rich.
He tried to steal the last election using lies and violence to keep himself in power after the voters had rejected him. He can never be trusted with power again. Of course, the Cheneys are not alone. Some of the most prominent Republican leaders of the last 2 decades have also declared Donald Trump unfit for office, including 2012 Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney.
Look at this. Liz Cheney, Dick Cheney, Mitt Romney. I mean, look at this list. Look at these faces. I mean, honestly, seriously, people, seriously. You want to know why the Republican Party was in the toilet and why Donald Trump was able to capture the Republican Party is because of these guys, these faces, and what they did to the Republican Party. When Dick Cheney and George Bush left office again in 2009, Bush had a 28% approval rating because of what they did in the Bush-Cheney administration. They set this country during the Bush Cheney administration. They set this country on a course that we will never ever come back from, and I will explain that to you when we get into the financial crisis and start talking about what these guys did in his administration. But these guys, I mean, they harmed our country in a way that, I mean, we'll never recover from. Dick Cheney and George Bush, mostly Dick Cheney, because Dick Cheney was running the things. He was running it. Let's listen to a little bit of this clip.
Never been an individual who is a greater threat to our republic than Donald Trump. He tried to steal the last election using lies and violence to keep himself in power after the voters had rejected him. He can never be trusted with power again. Of course, the Cheneys are not alone. Some of the most prominent Republican leaders of the last 2 decades have also declared Donald Trump unfit for office, including 2012 Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney, members of the McCain family, the former Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, and Mike Pence, Donald Trump's own vice president. And overnight, we learned that former President George W. Bush will not be making any endorsement whatsoever.
So that's significant, because we've been waiting, and the speculation was that George Bush was going to come out and endorse Kamala Harris. So he's come out and said that George, he's released a statement through his library. George W. Bush has no plans to endorse in 2024. And it's significant because Hot Carl's going to explain it to you here, because him coming out with that statement, he doesn't need to endorse Kamala Harris. He's the only living Republican president, and he says that he's going to hold his endorsement. Just the mere fact that he's holding his endorsement is an endorsement of Kamala Harris.
2012 Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney, members of the McCain family, the former Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, and Mike Pence, Donald Trump's own vice president. And overnight, we learned that former President George W. Bush will not be making any endorsement whatsoever. In other words, the only living former Republican president not named Trump is not supporting his party's presidential nominee.
In other words, he's got to give you the "and other words," that's the "and other words." The fact that George Bush puts out a statement that he's not going to endorse anyone, in other words, that means he's endorsing Kamala Harris. But the Cheneys, Dick Cheney. So I was explaining to you in the last podcast how Dick Cheney and George H.W. Bush go back to the Gerald Ford administration. And the Gerald Ford administration, if you don't know, no one ever voted for Gerald Ford. Richard Nixon, his vice president was Spiro Agnew. Spiro Agnew got caught up in some scandal and had to resign. And Gerald Ford was basically forced onto Nixon to be Nixon's vice president. At that point, this is before the Watergate scandal happens. And then Richard Nixon ends up resigning, and Gerald Ford, after not receiving a vote for vice president or anyone voting for him, he becomes the president of the United States. Gerald Ford, again, who sat on the Warren Commission. He was a member of the Warren Commission. I think that's very significant because these same people that killed JFK from the Eisenhower administration, Eisenhower's CIA, we talked about Allen Dulles and all of that, how I really didn't get into this, but I wanted to when we were talking about Eisenhower's farewell address, and I was explaining this stuff about Nixon, I guess a few months ago, but never really got into what I wanted to talk about with these people. But anyway, Nixon was Eisenhower's vice president. He was overseeing a lot of these covert ops that the CIA was doing all over the world. CIA was really hoping that Nixon would win the 1960 election. They had the Bay of Pigs invasion that they had already been prepping for. So when Nixon was sworn in, that immediately he would, approve it. And that's not what happened. Nixon didn't win the 1960 election. JFK won it. He ended up approving Bay of Pigs, but Bay of Pigs was a complete fiasco. John F. Kennedy says after Bay of Pigs famously that he wanted to splinter the CIA into tiny little pieces and scatter it into the wind. This is what Kennedy said about the CIA. Ends up firing Allen Dulles and all of his top officials. They end up killing JFK. I showed you the picture of George H.W. Bush standing in front of the book depository there at Daley Plaza. It was a CIA operation. It was a business operation. It basically, what happened to JFK in 1963 was an extension of the business plot. It was a business takeover. So anyway, so Nixon, he basically ruffles the feathers of these people. If you understand the Watergate break-in, it was a setup to get rid of Nixon. They get rid of Nixon. Ford becomes the president of the United States. And then this is called the Halloween Massacre. And one night there was this shakeup where Ford, gets rid of all of these people that were from the Nixon administration and then replaces them with loyalists to him. Again, he was on the Warren Commission. What are some of these shakeups? So let's read a little bit of this. Halloween Massacre is a term associating with major reorganization of U.S. presidential Gerald Ford's cabinet on November 4th, 1975, which was an attempt to address multiple high-level personality and policy clashes within the administration. The overhaul came at a time when the president's leadership and abilities were being broadly questioned, and he was being heavily criticized by California Governor Ronald Reagan, very important, and others from the nascent conservative wing. So this nascent conservative wing is different from the Rockefeller Republicans, these business Republicans, and Ronald Reagan was being very critical about what was going on in the Ford administration. I explained to you a little bit about how George H.W. Bush became the No, I don't want to see that. Where is it at? Hold on one moment. So explaining in the, if it wasn't the last podcast, the podcast before that, about how, come on, where did I put that? Where's the, okay, hold on. So I was explaining in the last podcast about how the, how George, it was the podcast before last. I was explaining how George H.W. Bush became Ronald Reagan's running mate. And after the primary, really contentious primary in 1980, where Ronald Reagan runs against George H.W. Bush, I mean, it was pretty contentious. I mean, they weren't friends. They didn't like each other. But anyway, when they get to the convention after Ronald Reagan wins enough delegates to win the nomination, they get to the convention that year, which was in Detroit. Ronald Reagan, and he was talking to Gerald Ford, and Gerald Ford and Ronald Reagan were planning to run together. But Gerald Ford was putting up all these demands where he wanted what they were calling a co-presidency, where they had co-responsibilities, and Ronald Reagan's like, that's ridiculous. So that kind of falls through. It is my belief that Gerald Ford was purposely putting these demands that Ronald Reagan could not accept, so that the deal with Ford and Reagan could fall through, and then these people that were close to Reagan, his advisors, they're the ones who recommended at the last minute that George H.W. Bush become the vice president, and Reagan agreed. That's how George H.W. Bush got on the ticket. But Ronald Reagan was very critical of the shakeup that Gerald Ford was doing early on when he came in and he replaced all these people from the Nixon administration. So let's read what the shakeup was. The shakeup had its roots in the beginning of the Ford presidency, as was the case of Lyndon B. Johnson and Harry Truman succeeded to the presidency intraterm in 1963 and 1945, basically saying that Truman did the same thing when he came in and replaced what's his name? God, I can't believe I'm drawing blank on New York. God, that's gonna kill me. Roosevelt, FDR. So when Truman came in and replaced Roosevelt, so they're basically comparing the shakeup to what Truman did when he came in and replaced Roosevelt. Anyway, Ford inherited President Nixon's cabinet, staff, presidential advisors, and the new Nixon and Ford appointees often clashed. So there was these clashes that were going on between these new appointees and then the holdovers from Nixon. So on October 25th, 1975, Don Rumsfeld, who would become George Bush's defense secretary when he comes in. So Don Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney submitted their resignations to the president. Attached to the resignation was letters. Letters was a memo with their detailed analysis of perceived problems and possible future strategies for the Ford administration. They blamed Robert T. Hartman, Kissinger, and Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, who was Ford's vice president. That's why we call them Rockefeller Republicans. And then right here, so this is when the Halloween massacre started on November 4th, 1975, which was on a Tuesday after the Halloween weekend, and which was timed to fit in the congressional confirmation window Ford terminated several Nixon holdovers and announced the names of new successors to new cabinet nominees. Henry Kissinger was replaced by Brent Scowcroft as the National Security Advisor. William Kobe. Now, the significance of William Kobe is because William Kobe was the Central Director of Central Intelligence during the Church Committee. And during the Church Committee, William Kobe gave up all of the CIA's secrets in what was called the family jewels. So William Kobe was replaced during the Halloween massacre by George H.W. Bush as director. George H.W. Bush becomes director of Central Intelligence. James R. Schlesinger is replaced from the chief of staff, and then Don Rumsfeld, who again was George W. Bush's Secretary of Defense, protege of Don Rumsfeld, deputy and protege, future president. Vice President Dick Cheney moved to chief of staff. So they fire Schlesinger and then move Rumsfeld to chief of staff, and then they move Dick Cheney to, where'd Dick Cheney go from that point? I think Dick Cheney went to the head of the Secretary of Defense, replace Secretary of Defense. Anyway, so Rumsfeld, Cheney, and Bush, they were all part of this shakeup. And when Ford fires all of these Nixon appointees and puts George Bush at the head of the CIA, Rumsfeld as chief of staff, and then Dick Cheney at the head of defense, is what I believe Dick Cheney went. So these guys go way back. They go back to the mid 1970s, and that's why George W. Bush, when he's elected in 2000, that all of his father's friends, they put around him. They put Rumsfeld at the Pentagon, Dick Cheney as his vice president, and I was telling you in the last podcast about how the code name, I was saying that the code name for the Secret Service was Edgar, going back to this guy from the 1950s, actor Edgar Bergen. He was a ventriloquist. You can see him here with his dummies. It wasn't the Secret Service that had this code name for Cheney. This was a name within the CIA that they would call Cheney. This wasn't his Secret Service code name. Within the CIA, this was a secret name that they would call Dick Cheney and call him Edgar. And it was pertaining to this guy, Edgar Bergen, who had the dummies. Basically, what they were saying is that Dick Cheney was the puppet master. He was there to be the puppet master of George W. Bush. That the reason that his George H.W. Bush's friends were put into the cabinet with George W. Bush were basically to make sure that he did the right things, to basically make sure that, he was basically the figurehead. Dick Cheney was basically the president of the United States. That's what this relationship to Edgar Bergen means, is that that Bush was the puppet and that the real president of the United States was Dick Cheney. So Dick Cheney was running everything. That actually comes from this book called The 1% Document or Doctrine, which is a book about the Bush Doctrine. The Bush Doctrine is that there's a 1% chance that there can be a nuclear attack, then it has to be treated as a certainty. That is the Bush Doctrine. And this book, The 1% Doctrine, is all about the Bush Doctrine and how Dick Cheney laid it out. The Bush Doctrine. It's called the Bush Doctrine, but the Bush Doctrine actually came from Dick Cheney. And it's all about, if there's a 1% chance, that's the Bush Doctrine. If there's a 1% chance that and this is all pertaining to Iraq, that Iraq had a nuclear program, then we had to evade, even if there's a 1% chance. So this guy is telling lies about Dick Cheney, telling lies about Iraq's nuclear capabilities. He also, Dick Cheney, along with George Bush, I was explaining in the last podcast how they got this memo titled Bin Laden Determined to Strike in the United States a month before 9/11, and these guys did nothing to protect the country. The document has been declassified, and we know with this secret, top secret CIA briefing to the president that he got a month before 9/11. We know what it says. It says it's warning. It says right here that the document says, including patterns of suspicious activities in the country consistent with preparations of hijackings. It's warning. The document warned that they were preparing to hijack planes a month before they actually hijacked planes. So not only did the president of the United States get this daily brief a month before 9/11, his entire intelligence cabinet, intelligence group within his cabinet got this, including Dick Cheney. A month before 9/11, they had a warning that terrorists were planning on hijacking plane. This is a little bit from the book, from the preface of the book, The 1% Doctrine. I'll just read a little bit of this. It says, the alarming August 6, 2001 memo from the CIA to the president, Bin Laden determined to attack in the United States. It's really funny too, because after this document was it was leaked out, it was still classified. They hadn't declassified it yet. So even though it was leaked and the press saw it, they couldn't release it to the public so we would know what was in it. And then Condoleezza comes out and she lies about the title and says that the title is Bin Laden determined to strike the United States, not in the United States. When it actually says in the United States, she says, no, it was the United States. And we thought that it was something, overseas. And then when the document is declassified, we see that the title is in fact in the United States. So they lied about that when it first came out. But another lie that they told was that that it wasn't a warning. It was just a historical report, that it wasn't a warning. The title of the document is Bin Laden is determined. How are you determined to do something in the past? It's saying that not only are they going to strike in the United States, they're determined to strike in the United States. So they told us all those lies after it came out. Memo, Bin Laden determined to strike in the United States, has widely been noted for the past few years. But also in August, so in addition to this August 6th report, is what Ron Sunskine is writing here. But also in August, CIA analysts flew to Crawford to personally brief the president and to intrude on his vacation face to face. The analytical arm of the CIA was in the kind of panic mode at this point. They were in kind of panic mode at this point. Other intelligence services, including those from the Arab world, were sounding the alarm. This is a month before 9/11 when they're meeting and there's multiple reports too of warning Bush over and over again that and Cheney warning the Bush cabinet and Cheney that, look, there's getting ready to be an attack. The arrows were all in red, and they didn't know the place and time for the attack, but something was coming. The president needed to know. And then Siscon writes from a source that was at that briefing. It could have been Tom Morell, because I believe Tom Morell, or not Tom Morell, Michael Morell. I think that's his name. It was one of the briefers that were briefing. Yeah, I believe Michael Morrell was one of the briefers that were there at Crawford. But anyway, I don't know if this came from Morrell or from another CIA briefer, but he writes in this book, The 1% Doctrine, from a source, in quotes, that after getting this briefing titled "Bin Laden Determined to Attack," warning that they're getting ready to hijack planes and all that, Bush, he says, all right, he said, "You've covered your ass now." That's what he writes in the book. This is the way Bob Kerrey from Nebraska, Purple Heart recipient, war hero, who sat on the Warren Commission, this is the way he describes the same meeting that Ron Sinskine writes about in the 1% Doctrine.
To the disaster in the first place.
How so?
Well, the 9/11 report says in Chapter 8, now it's beyond the campaign, so the promise I had to keep this out of the campaign is over. And the 9/11 report in Chapter 8 says that in the summer of 2001, the government ignored repeated warnings by the CIA. Ignored. And didn't do anything to harden our border security, didn't do anything to harden airport security, didn't do anything to engage local law enforcement, didn't do anything to round up INS and consular offices and say we have to shut this down, and didn't warn the American people. The famous presidential daily briefing on August 6th, we say in the report that the briefing officers believed that there was a considerable sense of urgency and it was current. So there was a case that could be made that wasn't made.
But what we've continued to hear from this administration is that the threat was much too diffuse. There was no way that you could zero in on the fact that al-Qaeda was going to use jets as bombs and ram them into buildings.
That is a straw man. The president says, if I'd only known that 19 Islamic men would come into the United States of America and on the morning of the 11th September hijack 4 American aircraft, fly 2 into the World Trade Center, 1 in the Pentagon, and 1 into an unknown destination that crashed in Shanksville, I would have moved heaven and earth. That's what he said. So, Mr. President, you don't need to know that. This is an Islamic jihadist movement that's been organized since the early 1990s, been declared war in the United States twice, in 96 and 98. You knew they were in the United States. You were warned by the CIA. You knew in July they were inside the United States. You were told again by briefing officers in August that it was a dire threat. And what did you do? Nothing, so far as we could see in the 9/11 Commission. Now, that's in the report.
Nothing. They did nothing. Ron Sinskine writes in the 1% Doctrine that after getting the August 6th report, that Bush said, all right, you've covered your ass now. They did nothing a month before 9/11. You didn't need to, what Bob Kerry's saying here, you didn't need to know what they were going to do with the planes after they hijacked them. The CIA told you they were getting ready to hijack planes. What did you do to stop them from hijacking the planes? But Cheney was running all of this because Cheney was Edgar. Cheney was the puppet master. Cheney was the one who was running the Bush administration. And he got the same document, this presidential daily brief, saying that bin Laden's determined to attack. They want to hijack planes. They did nothing. They let it happen. They let 3,000 Americans die on American soil. And then they parlayed it into an unnecessary war in Iraq and tried to lie to us and tell us that Iraq was responsible for the attack on 9/11. They set up this office. Now, I just explained to you how Don Rumsfeld, who was part of the Halloween massacre, Don Rumsfeld came in with George H.W. Bush and in the shakeup with Dick Cheney. They were all in the Gerald Ford administration in the 1970s, Gerald Ford, who sat on the Warren Commission. So after 9/11, after they allowed the attack on 9/11 to happen, then they start preparing for the war in Iraq and using fake intelligence to lie us into the war in Iraq. Don Rumsfeld, who was George H.W. Bush's good friend from the Ford administration, and he is now George W. Bush's Secretary of Defense. He ran the Pentagon. Within the Pentagon, you had your CIA intelligence agencies. You had your and you had the DIA, which is your Defense Intelligence Agency. This group was even separate from, this group was in the Pentagon, but separate from Defense Intelligence, separate from the CIA, separate from the other intelligence agencies. This was just a special group that was set up within the Pentagon, and their entire job was to create fake intelligence, fake information to create the need to go to war in Iraq. Let's read a little bit about this office. The Office of Special Plans, OSP, which existed from September 2002 to June 2003, was a Pentagon unit created by Paul Wolfowitz and Douglas Feith, and headed by Feith, as charged by the then United States Secretary of Defense, Don Rumsfeld, to supply senior George Bush administration officials, including Dick Cheney, with raw intelligence, unvetted by intelligence agencies. So these guys were creating the intelligence to feed to George Bush, and none of this intelligence was being vetted by the CIA and the intelligence officials that were trained, that should have been vetting this information. As a matter of fact, we're talking about the Italian letter and the receipt from Iraq buying yellow cake uranium from Niger, which came, it was this document that came from Italian intelligence. That piece of intelligence, the CIA and those analysts were telling the Bush administration over and over again that is bogus intelligence, that is not true intelligence. And Dick Cheney and the Bush administration continue to use that fake intelligence over and over again. Bush in his 2002 State of the Union, and that's why, if you know what Bush did in that 2002 State of the Union, the 16 words, he says that the British government has learned that Saddam Hussein has recently bought significant quantities of yellow cake uranium from Africa. Why is he saying the British government? Because his own CIA was telling him it's bogus. That's why he had to attribute it to MI6 and to the British government. But they knew that it was a lie. And they were using this after they had allowed 9/11 to happen, 3,000 Americans to be killed on American soil. Now they're lying us and parlaying us into a war where millions more are going to be killed in Iraq, and 1,000 more American soldiers and contractors because of their lies. This guy and Dick Cheney, who's endorsed Kamala Harris now. So this group, the Office of Special Plans, was set up for nothing more than create phony intelligence to sell the war in Iraq. And then the war in Iraq was a fiasco. And then I explained to you how in 2006, when Democrats, they beat Republicans and they take control of both houses of Congress, they take control of the House and the Senate. Nancy Pelosi becomes the first female Speaker of the House in 2006. Everyone's expecting her to impeach George W. Bush, or at least to defund the war and to force him to make a drawdown, because this is what Nancy Pelosi is promising. She does none of that when she comes in 2007. The only thing that happens is that George Bush fires his father's friend, Don Rumsfeld, as the Secretary of Defense, and then he hires his father's CIA director, Bob Gates, to be the Secretary of Defense, and then it's business as usual. Nancy Pelosi and Democrats do nothing to restrain Bush. They double down on the policy in Iraq and surge. And then when Barack Obama comes in after running on a platform of change you can believe in, he keeps Robert Gates, his Bush's former CIA director, the guy that ran Iran-Contra, the guy who Bush brought on to double down on the Iraq policy, brings him on, and Barack Obama keeps him on as Secretary of Defense after he runs on a platform of change. So these guys are not committed to change at all. So that's who Dick Cheney is. That's who the Cheneys are, representing the Bush-Clinton dynasty, and now they have come out and they've endorsed Kamala Harris, and listen to what she says about their endorsement. Let me mind you, if anybody of who is of ill repute and vile, someone like Dick Cheney, who even all the Democrats, they called him a vile individual of ill repute for years and years. If anybody like that, I remember when David Duke endorsed Donald Trump. Donald Trump was forced to renounce that endorsement. I don't want that endorsement. I don't want an endorsement from a person like that. But listen to what Kamala Harris says about the endorsement from Dick Cheney. Take a listen.
Actually, I'm honored to have their endorsement.
Honored.
And I think that
honored
as leaders who are well respected are making an important statement.
Well respected.
It's okay, and if not important, to put country above party.
Put country before party.
I'm honored to have their support.
Honored again.
I think it's an important statement right now. A lot of what I think is happening, and I was just talking with some folks here in Pittsburgh about it, is that people are exhausted about the division and the attempts to kind of divide us as Americans. And them stepping up to make this public statement, I think, is courageous, but also for people like the folks I was just talking with, it really reinforces for them that we love our country and we have more in common than what separates us.
Honored, huh? Honored is what she says. So, I mean, how are you putting country before party, Liz Cheney, Dick Cheney, when, the things that, first of all, these are the things that Liz Cheney said about Kamala Harris. That she's a gun grabber, radical liberal who will raise taxes, take away health insurance, explode the size and power of government. How are you putting country above party if you're voting for someone like this? How? If you know someone is going to do this to our country, she wants to recreate America in the image of what's happening on the streets of Portland and Seattle, is what Liz Cheney says about Kamala Harris. And you want me to believe that this is about putting party above country? You believe that you're voting for someone who wants to do this to our country? But no, it's the endorsement of Kamala Harris. Even Liz Cheney herself admits it has nothing to do with policy. To her and to her father, it's not about policy. To us, the policies are important to us. Kamala Harris's open border policies are important to us. Her economic policies, that's important to us. Her foreign policy, whatever that is, that's important to us. But Liz Cheney says that it's not about policy.
You've made it abundantly clear that you have had policy disagreements.
And let me just say, the way that he asked this question, just want you to notice that this clown he's on the team. He's Team Harris 100%. The way that he asked this question, the only reason he's asking this question is to get out there that Kamala Harris has moved towards the center, that now she's not a far left anymore person like Liz Cheney says here, radical liberal, that she's moved towards the center and she's more moderate now is what asking this question is what Hot Carl is trying to get out.
You still have policy disagreements with Harris, but she has moderated her positions on a whole range.
She says she has.
She was just a few years ago. Did those moderations and the efforts to present kind of a moderate face at the Democratic convention, did that make the decision to endorse her easier?
I have never viewed this as a policy election.
Right.
But I think that it's a very important point. If you look at Vice President Harris's speech, for example, at the Democratic convention, it is a speech that Ronald Reagan could have given. It's a speech that George Bush could have given. It's very much
it's not about policy to her. She says, this is not about policy for me. I've never viewed this as a policy issue because the policies are, you've already said, Kamala Harris's policies are raise taxes, take away guns and health care, explode the size of government, wants to recreate what's on the streets of, these are the policies. But she says it's not about policy for her. That Kamala Harris, that the speech she gave at the DNC, it could have been a speech that Ronald Reagan or George Bush gave. It could have been a speech that Ronald Reagan or George Bush gave. Very interesting. But I don't believe that it's not about policy. There's one policy for sure that Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney and the military industrial complex, defense establishment. There's one policy that they care about, and they care a lot about this policy, and that policy is war. I want you to listen to what Alyssa Fair Griffin says here.
Dick Cheney, the fact that he endorsed, I'm obsessed with this as somebody who covered him. I still can't, my jaw is on the table that he endorsed a Democrat.
Yeah, it's not that big of a deal.
Kind of blow it off, saying endorsements don't matter.
Noted rhino Dick Cheney. It's incredibly significant. So statistically speaking, there are undecided voters who very likely voted for a presidential ticket that Dick Cheney was on. Dick Cheney is an internationalist who cares about American leadership abroad. And
Dick Cheney is an internationalist. What the hell is an internationalist? You mean a globalist, girl? You mean he's a globalist? That's what you mean. So this is what this is about. This is what it comes down to. It comes down to nationalism versus globalism. It comes down to America first or sending all of our money overseas to fund more wars and to keep the wars going. And what is that all about? This is what Alyssa says, that Dick Cheney, the real reason that Dick Cheney and the Cheneys are supporting Kamala Harris is because they see the world in the same way as far as being internationalists. You mean globalists. And this comes down to the war in Ukraine. This is what it comes down to. They want to keep that money pot and that honey pot going. Keep that money going to Ukraine. And they know that if Donald Trump comes in, that he's going to put an end to that. And that's what this is about. This is nothing more than the military industrial complex and the defense establishment all joining sides. They've always been on the same side of the Bush-Clinton dynasty. That's what the Bush-Clinton dynasty represents. And that's what it's about. It's about globalism. Internationalism is what she says.
Endorsements don't matter.
Noted rhino Dick Cheney. It's incredibly significant. So statistically speaking, there are undecided voters who very likely voted for a presidential ticket that Dick Cheney was on. Dick Cheney is an internationalist who cares about American leadership abroad, and Ukraine is on the ballot, continuing support for Ukraine and its war against Russia. That is something that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have not committed to continuing. And, of course, fundamentally, the Constitution wanting to overturn elections.
So the war in Ukraine and committed to continuing the war in Ukraine is what she says. That is the crux of what it comes down to, and why these war hawks and all these war Republicans, neocon Rockefeller Republicans are supporting Kamala Harris because she represents the empire. She represents keeping the wars going, keeping the money flowing to Ukraine, and that money laundering scheme. That's what it's all about. Internationalism. Nikki Haley, actually applaud her here because I would tend to put her on the same side with these neocons, but she's asked about statements that Liz Cheney made about her, and she actually hits the ball out of the park here. Let's take a listen to Nikki Haley.
I can't understand her position on this in any kind of a principled way. I think that, the things that she said, that she made clear when she was running in the primary, those things are true. Casting a vote for Donald Trump or writing someone in means that you've made the decision in too many instances that so many elected Republicans have made, which is to abandon the Constitution.
Your reaction to her reaction?
I respect her decision, but she can't say my decision is not principled. It actually is. We can either vote based on style or we can vote on substance. I'm voting based on substance. I'm looking at the fact we can't live the next 4 years like we did the last 4 years. This is no contest. Harris raised taxes. Trump reduced taxes. Harris wants to stop any energy production. Trump built it up. Harris is weak on national security. Trump was strong on national security. Harris has allowed the border to be infiltrated by 8 million people. Trump was much harder on the border. This is about my family. This is about America.
Good for you.
These are about issues. We should be very clear. If you don't like him, say you don't like him, but you can't say that his policies are worse than Kamala Harris's. That's just not a fact.
That's awesome. So, Nikki Haley's saying something that's completely different from what Liz Cheney's saying. Liz Cheney's saying it's not about policy. And she's actually lying here because it is about one policy, and the policy is Ukraine and keeping the Ukraine money going, just like Alyssa says. But Nikki Haley says, look, this is about policy. This is about my family. This is about the economy. This is about what she's doing at the border, And I applaud her for saying that because she's 100% right. I mean, you would be a fool to vote for Kamala Harris if you believe everything that Liz Cheney has said about Kamala Harris in the past. And Liz Cheney, she's not saying that she's taking any of this back. I mean, she did say that Kamala Harris's speech at the DNC was Reagan-esque or Bush-esque, but she doesn't say she's taking any of this back about her being a radical liberal who wants to take guns or anything like that. I mean, and Kamala Harris says, I'm honored to have Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney and all of these Republicans. I'm honored to have their endorsement. All right, so I have a few more minutes. I have a couple of other things that I want to talk about before I get out of here today, and then we'll see what happens in the debate tomorrow. But hopefully, when we get back on Friday, we're going to start talking about the financial crisis, and I'm going to start laying out what these guys did to you. What these guys did to you, and they want to blame it all on this guy. All right, we're going to talk about that. But I want you to pay attention to some of these ads that Kamala Harris was running when she first became the nominee. You can look at the date on this ad. It was put out August 9th. It's about a month ago. And I want you to see if you can notice a difference, something different in the ads that Kamala Harris was running a month ago and the ads that she is running now. Take a listen.
She grew up in a middle-class home. She was the daughter of a working mom, and she worked at McDonald's while she got her degree.
All right, so that's one. Okay, let's look at this one.
She's old enough to have over 30 years of experience in public service and young enough to remember working her way through school at McDonald's.
Okay, so that's another one. Let's look at this one.
When you're raised by an immigrant mother, you learn what's possible with determination.
And determination is how Kamala Harris
went from working in McDonald's to prosecute.
All right, so that's 3 ads that she ran early on a month ago that she was running. They all reference her working at McDonald's. These are the ads that she's running now. Take a listen, see if you can notice the difference. What's missing here?
We all know costs are too high, but while corporations are gouging families, Trump is focused on giving them tax cuts. But Kamala Harris is focused on you.
Building up the middle class will be a defining goal of my presidency.
She'll make groceries more affordable by cracking down on price gouging. And she'll cut housing costs by taking on corporate speculators. Middle-class families build America. We need a leader who has their back.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
What happened to McDonald's? What happened to you working at McDonald's? That's just, why is that missing from the ads now? And if you go back and this is just one ad that she's put out recently. This ad came out 6 days ago. But there's multiple ads that I can show you that she's put out recently. And none of them mention her working at McDonald's like these early ads a month ago. What happened? Well, maybe this reporter here from the New York Post will explain it. In this tweet, he says, developing. This was August 30th. This is a week ago. Developing. Kamala Harris has stopped referencing her alleged job at McDonald's and won't respond to media questions seeking the location of the McDonald's store and the dates of her employment at the McDonald's, which appears nowhere in her memoirs or early resumes developing. So this was August 30th. This was about 2 weeks ago that he put this out, and it's still developing. What has happened to Kamala Harris's referencing of her working at McDonald's? And is it true that she worked at McDonald's? And if it's not true, this is a huge scandal. Why is this a huge scandal? Because why is she lying about working at McDonald's? So she can relate to working class people. Look, people, this woman is a Brahmin Indian. I know you don't know what that means because we are American. We do have a caste system, but it's not a overt caste system in the United States like they have in India. India's caste system is what's the word I'm looking for? It is like the air that they breathe in India. It is all palpable is the word that I was looking for, the caste system in India. Kamala Harris comes from the very top caste. She is Brahmin Indian. The very lowest caste in the Indian caste system, they call them the untouchables, that you're not even allowed to touch them. And she is a Brahmin Indian, which is at the very top caste. Kamala Harris has never wanted for anything. She making up a story about her working at McDonald's is so she can try to relate to working class people. And if she made up this lie, this is a huge deal. What's his name on Fox? Jesse Kelly. He's been on this story. I want you to take a look at this report.
Ever since Tiananmen Tim got busted for lying about being a head coach, inflating his military service, and telling Kamala he can't handle spice after winning a spicy taco competition, there's been growing doubts about the Harris Walls campaign. Tonight, one of Kamala's key elements to her biography is come into question, and it's a big one.
I want to ask a question about a topic that really unites America. Fast food. Okay, so here's the deal. I heard a rumor that you worked at McDonald's. Is this true?
I did. Yes, I did.
I
didn't know that about you. I was in school.
Me too. I worked registered, drive-through, and grill. I was known as a triple threat, okay? Just for the record.
I did fries.
Just the fries?
I did fries, and then I did the cashier.
Okay, I'm impressed. Fries are hard.
A producer at Primetime who used to work the kitchen says fries aren't hard. They're the easiest. And Kamala didn't even start talking about cooking fries until she decided to run for president. There was no mention of McDonald's in both of her memoirs. And so far, all reporters looking into it have found no evidence. Andrew Kerr is a reporter at the Washington Free Beacon who's been investigating this story. So what'd you find?
Right. Well, Kamala's story about her job at McDonald's has shifted dramatically over the past couple weeks. At first, her campaign came out and said that this was a job she worked to pay her way through college. But now they say that she worked there for one summer just to earn a little extra spending money. So, yeah, we looked into it. Did she actually work at McDonald's? Well, she didn't mention it throughout the first several decades of her political career, made no mention of it in both of her books, including her 2019 memoir, in which she devoted an entire chapter to the struggles of service industry workers. There's been
listen. In her memoir, she devoted an entire chapter to the struggle of service industry workers, and she doesn't include it in that. And then she just starts talking about this job at McDonald's, and then when people start asking about it, looking into it, she just drops it. She doesn't talk about it anymore. It's not in any more of her ads or anything. I mean, people, I think this is a huge scandal because it shows that this woman is not relatable. She is, when she ran in 2020, she was the wealthiest candidate. Her and her husband were the wealthiest candidates that were running in 2020 of all the Democrats. She, again, is a Brahmin Indian, the top caste in the Indian caste system. Her making up this lie, trying to relate to working class people, it just shows that how phony she is, and I mean, how completely inauthentic she is. I guess that's the same thing as being phony. Anyway, that's the podcast, folks. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you on Friday. Have a good week.